All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So, I'm going to do another fun and detailed and nerdy philosophy deep dive today on, as you can see in the scroll there, Frankfurt School Marxists, Adorno and Horkheimer's book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment, and their theory that it's anti-Semitic, and the Nazis were basically the champions of reason. So I thought this would be a really interesting subject to get into because it's pretty popular in discussions about culture that people are getting into and basically de-escalating into like YouTube drama and Twitter battles and shit like that. And as usual, I like to call out public intellectuals for getting things wrong, and a lot of them have been doing so. So I'm going to go through. Oh, here we go. So I'm going to go through this here. So this is the Adorno and Horkheimer's book called Dialectic of Enlightenment, and Horkheimer and Adorno, they were Marxists in the Frankfurt School, and the Frankfurt School is famous for, they were a school of philosophy that were extremely critical of the Enlightenment. And I'm trying to screen share this here. Sorry, just give me a sec. Oh, okay. I see. So, yeah. So, Adorno and Horkheimer, along with some other people for sure, like Marcuse, for example, they were famous Marxists in the Frankfurt School, and a lot of them, basically, they were forming this detailed philosophy, and it's been associated with what public intellectuals are talking about as critical theory, and then they're lumping it together with critical race theory and postmodernism, as they often do. So, public intellectuals like James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson and members of the IDW and whatnot, they've been going around and spreading misinformation about this. So here is a picture of Adorno and Horkheimer, and of course, so they get into, as I said, they get into the such a heavy critique of the Enlightenment that basically it was fundamentally flawed because it's based on a mythology. And one of the goals of the Enlightenment, at least in terms of the secular values that people who were advocates of the Enlightenment tried to advocate for, was to, as I said, be more secular and attempt to get away from mythology. So the Frankfurt School were famous for inventing what people are talking about now called critical theory. And a critical theory is like, it's more than what it sounds like it is. It isn't just like skepticism or shit like that, but it's also not just like fucking straight up Marxism or, SJW bullshit or something like that, like people like James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson are saying. So, the Frankfurt School, I like this, from a failed revolution to critical theory, because there is something to be said for how the Frankfurt School was, the goal behind it was Marxism, because, as I said, Adorno and Horkheimer were Marxists, and others like I mentioned, Marcuse, for example, and there are others as well. Like I would say, Habermas is a famous one of them as well. So this critical theory, as I said before, it's its own separate thing. It's not postmodernism, and it's not critical race theory. These are three totally different realms of academic thought. So they're all critical of the Enlightenment in their own ways, though, but they're critical of the Enlightenment in different ways. So what is critical theory? I'm going to explain this a little bit, because a lot of times people, like public intellectuals who pretend to know what they're talking about, but they don't really, like Jordan Peterson and James Lyndsay, are saying that like philosophers like Foucault and Derrida are responsible for critical theory, even though Foucault and Derrida actually had nothing to do with critical theory, other than that critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer and other critical theorists in the Frankfurt School, they were criticizing each other all over the place all the fucking time. Like Foucault and Derrida, the only similarity is that Foucault and Derrida were critical of the Enlightenment, and the Frankfurt School Marxists like Adorno and Horkheimer were as well. But like I said, they were both critical of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. The post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida that get called postmodernists, even though they weren't really, they were different. Their criticisms of the Enlightenment, like I said, were different and differing in severity from each other. So Foucault and Derrida, for example, and as I talked about with Peter Salmon on my podcast with him, who wrote a biography about Derrida, check out that podcast. Even Foucault and Derrida disagreed with each other often. They didn't just have this like consistent ideology that they both agreed on. So Foucault and Derrida, they were critical. They were harsh, extremely harsh about many aspects of the Enlightenment, right? But they didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Contrary to what many public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson and James Lyndsay and Helen Pluckrose and Sam Harris and people in the so-called intellectual dark web or IDW, contrary to what they say, Foucault and Derrida did not think that the Enlightenment was a mistake. So the critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer, they thought that the Enlightenment was fundamentally flawed because it was anti-Semitic. That's why I'm showing this. Jews not allowed. They thought that the Enlightenment was fundamentally anti-Semitic to its core, and that it was a mistake. Now, I have to fucking emphasize this. No, Jordan Peterson, James Lyndsay, Helen Pluckrose, the book Cynical Theories, the IDW, you guys are fucking wrong when you say that Foucault and Derrida thought the Enlightenment was a mistake. We have to break down all the modern structures of society. No, Foucault and Derrida's project was purely rhetorical and theoretical. The critical theorists were actual Marxists, and they made some good points too, which I will get to, like this aspect of mythology that I was talking about. Now, I think that Foucault and Derrida made some great criticisms. Saying that the Enlightenment is anti-Semitic, that is where I think it goes too fucking far. This is why I'm a fan of Foucault and Derrida, but I'm way less of a fan of critical theory. And like I said, critical theory and critical race theory and postmodernism, they're all three different intellectual movements or intellectual realms of thought. But so So for critical theory, what Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about in Dialectic of Enlightenment, when they're talking about anti-Semitism, they're criticizing a popular theory at the time of and afterward of many intellectuals, particularly rationalist philosophers who are big champions of the Enlightenment and rationalism and reason, who basically they had the theory that the Nazis were totally against the project of the Enlightenment, and they were totally the opposite of reason and rationality. But contrary to this, critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer basically said, no, this is totally fucking backwards. Actually, the Nazis were the champions of reason. They were the champions of reason, rationality, and Enlightenment principles. That's the way they saw themselves anyway. Look at how, like, organized and completely structured and rationalistic the Nazi regime was. It was like, in their own minds at least, they were following like Enlightenment principles, like let's practice eugenics and make the world a better place. They were obviously fucking delusional and crazy and being run by a fucking psychotic leader like Hitler. And so they rationalized this fucking detailed, sophisticated, fucking wacko nut job ideology. A lot of people believe some crazy shit. So it was like following rationalistic principles. It was not like just all this off the wall shit. Like, they thought they had a sophisticated ideology. And I think that this is one of the good points that Adorno and Horkheimer make, that the Nazis were actually like, they were following Enlightenment principles, and they were champions of reason. Like, according to the Enlightenment, they were following reason and rationality. Even like Sam Harris, bro, says that, from a certain perspective, terrorists are being rational. If you rationally think that you're going to go to the eternal paradise in the afterlife when you die, if you kill yourself in a suicide bombing, well, it makes rational sense for you to try to basically do a suicide bombing so you can go to heaven and get 72 virgins or some shit, right? So even champion of reason, Sam Harris, says something like that. So you can apply the same shit to Nazis. The Nazis were champions of reason. I agree with that. Got reason. And this is another point that I like about particularly Foucault and Derrida, because they don't get carried away, as I said. They don't say that the Enlightenment is a mistake. They want to fix it. They don't want to totally tear down the system. But I think this is a good point. This critique of this mythology of reason. That's one thing that Adorno and Horkheimer talk about. They talk about how basically the Enlightenment follows a mythology of praising reason and rationality, and we're going to be secular and organized society in this just like authoritarian and really specified way, and run everything like a well-oiled machine, a well-oiled rationalistic machine. It almost sounds like Ayn Rand's utopia in Atlas Shrugged, right? Which a lot of people think is bullshit, which I think it is too, because it's basically just a straight up anarcho-capitalist utopia, which sounds good in theory, I admit, because that is a well-written book, regardless of what people say, and regardless of how much, Ayn Rand's philosophy makes no sense. But anyway, so as I said, a lot of public intellectuals, who I do respect, by the way, I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. I think a lot of these public intellectuals are making a lot of good points, and they say a lot of good things, but they're just misinforming people about philosophy, because and I just read tons of philosophy books. It's easy to educate yourself about this shit, and you can talk to philosophers who know what they're fucking talking about, or authors like Peterson, who I've talked to, for example. And so, public intellectuals here, like James Lyndsay, with him, for example, I really like his book with Peter Boghossian called How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's a good book for, exactly as the title implies, having difficult conversations with people. And it's helpful for someone like me, because sometimes I get all like egotistical and angry at people about shit that I really truly have when I really have truly strong feelings about my beliefs, which applies to anyone, right? Which is why people can have such vehement disagreements about things. And I actually got to talk to him briefly on the Mixed Mental Arts podcast that we did about how to have impossible conversations. And I was going to do a conversation with him, and maybe I still will, which would be great, but it didn't end up happening about this subject. But it seemed like one thing that I like about James Lyndsay is he went on Thaddeus Russell's podcast and he talked about how he had investigated the relevant the relevant literature more and found that Foucault, this link was actually more directly to the Marxists in the Frankfurt School in terms of wokeness and the crazy SJW shit, like there's no gender has nothing to do with biology. There is no difference between men and women. All white people are racist, all this kind of shit. So he said that this was more directly linked to the Frankfurt School. And he was right about that. Even if you go to the Goodreads description of Dialectic of Enlightenment, it talks about how this book is like directly related to queer theorists, gender theorists, feminists, Marxists, all this kind of shit. Even though another thing I like about why it's important to read the fucking text yourself is that it's not like this, that book doesn't even use those words. Adorno and Horkheimer, they don't talk about gender or race or anything like that. They're talking about power, reason, the Enlightenment, rationality, and criticizing those aspects. They're not talking about any of that shit like gender and race and shit like that. So even the critical theorists themselves they're not anywhere near as crazy as you might think they are. Like, they say some extreme shit like the Enlightenment is anti-Semitic. Obviously, that's a simplistic explanation, but it's interesting. But anyway, public intellectuals like James Lyndsay are going around saying that postmodernism, critical theory, critical race theory, they all started off different, but now they're all the same thing and they're all part of wokeness and there are direct links between all of them. No, that's fucking bullshit. Jordan Peterson and other public intellectuals in the IDW and shit like that, those people are wrong about that shit too. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about when they say this shit. And when they talk about how, critical race theory is teaching people to hate America and shit like that. No, that's not what critical race theorists are teaching either. So, Jordan Peterson is one person I've talked about a lot. And again, I don't have a fundamental problem with him either. I think he does a lot of good work and he helps a lot of people. And I like some of his books, especially his first one called Maps of Meaning, where he talks about different religious themes throughout different religions and how those can be connected to psychological principles. And I like his newest book, 12 More Rules for Life. I forget what the main title is. I like more of the rules than I did in his last one. I really didn't like 12 Rules for Life. But anyway, he's done some good work for sure. And I think he's a good person with good motivations, just like James Lyndsay. But he's also, he invented this fucking bullshit term, postmodern neo-Marxists, which is a fucking stupid, totally opposite thing. As I said, the critical theorists and people like Foucault and Derrida, they were totally in opposition to each other because they thought that Foucault and Derrida thought that the critical theorists were taking shit too far and they were being fucking authoritarian because Marxists are authoritarian. And Derrida and Foucault flirted with Marxist thought, but they've basically realized, no, that's too fucking authoritarian. And if you actually read their work, especially Foucault, in my opinion, who I'm a little bit more familiar with than Derrida, admittedly, he sounds like a fucking anarchist when you read his writing. He's totally fucking anti-authoritarian. As I pointed out in one of my videos that I'm doing in my series on history of sexuality, in one of his videos, he literally says verbatim, government is the only fatal form of power. Does that sound like a fucking Marxist to you? Especially not a fucking Stalinist Marxist, at least. If you're like an anarcho-syndicalist or a libertarian socialist, like Bakunin or Noam Chomsky or the YouTuber Vosh, then you believe in democratic worker control of the ownership of businesses rather than authoritarian government control. But that's not the type of Marxism that Adorno and Horkheimer were practicing. As far as I know, I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they were more like closer to Stalinists and Maoists in that sense. But anyway, the point is that this term postmodern neo-Marxist is fucking bullshit, and postmodernism has nothing to do with fucking wokeness. Marxism maybe does, but even Marxism has way less to do with wokeness than people like James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson are saying they do. It's not explicitly Marxism. It's a whole bunch of a collection of fucking confused ideas, and sometimes some of which actually make sense because we'll get into critical race theory and how that actually does make more sense than the way these public intellectuals describe it often too. So as I said, these guys, they're not like total idiots who have bad intentions like some uber lefties say they are. That's taking shit too far too. In the same way that, saying the Enlightenment is anti-Semitic and it's fundamentally flawed and we should get rid of it and that kind of shit. It's just as extreme as this other shit too. So anyway, though, let's get into postmodernism a little bit there. Oh wait, I went to the wrong thing there. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about so-called postmodernism thing here, which is sorry, I was getting ahead of myself there. Not really a thing. So-called postmodernism. People use the terms postmodernism, but it doesn't really mean one consistent thing. It means a whole lot of different shit. And Foucault and Derrida didn't even know that fucking term and never used it themselves. So that's basically all it means, though, if you want to boil it down to one thing here. We should examine the modern principles. Postmodernists. Postmodernists in the sense that people are post-capitalists or some shit like that. They don't think that, they talk about theories because they don't like capitalism, but they're like examining these things rhetorically and theoretically. And postmodernists do this even more so. Post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida, they're examining the institutions of modern society, like churches, religions, governments, science, rationalism, reason. Foucault and Derrida, particularly Foucault, are extremely critical of just government in general, and science, and how science and religion created categories during the Enlightenment that oppress people, like inventing the category of homosexuality when before there was no distinguishment between homosexuals and heterosexuals. So they made heterosexuality the normal category, and then science and religion basically declared that it's a sin and you're medically flawed if you're homosexual, right? So that is a negative byproduct of the Enlightenment, which again, Adorno and Horkheimer would say means that we should get rid of the Enlightenment, and it is a mistake. But Foucault and Derrida would just say, this is some fucked up shit, man. We should probably do something to try to fix it, which is just basically fucking common sense. So anyway, James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson and all these fucking IDW people, they're talking a lot about critical race theory, especially lately. And as usual, they're fucking strawmanning this shit like nobody's business, of course. So what is critical race theory? Well, let's talk about this. So as I've read many books about postmodernism and by postmodernists, I've started reading more about critical theory by the critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer, and I've started reading textbooks about critical race theory as well. My friend Dusty, who I talk to all the time, recommended one to me. So critical race theory, if you actually read the texts about this, it's just like it started off as a legal theory. It was ways that people were looking at the legal system and the ways that the American criminal justice system in particular has led to racially disproportionate outcomes for people. And that's basically what it started out as. And that's most of what it is still. It's people who are looking at racial disparities between people and trying to solve these racial disparities. So basically, it started off, like I said, most of it still is just people saying, like black people are way more disproportionately in prison, and the criminal justice system is organized in such a way, in so many different ways, that people get into, like that book, The New Jim Crow, which is not just some fucking SJW shit. It sounds like that by the title, but it's not. Basically, the point of the book is the American criminal justice system led to the drug war, and the drug war in particular leads to racially disproportionate outcomes, which is why I think if you just end the fucking drug war, you'll solve a lot of race, class, and crime problems, which is probably fucking true. But anyway, it leads to way more black people being put in prison than is necessary, even at all. No one should be in prison at all for nonviolent drug offenses. And black people have a harder time. They're treated as criminals in society more than white people are. So critical race theorists want to try to change laws to account for racial disparities. There's nothing wrong with that. But so the complicated thing is that these things are not as simple as anyone is making them out to be. The fucking right-wingers are just as much of a problem in the SJWs in this sense. When we're talking about critical race theory or critical theory or postmodernism, because the uber SJW social justice activists don't read this shit either. They don't read this shit, and the fucking right-winger political pundits don't read it either, because they both go around saying this bullshit, like all white people are racist, like this Robin DiAngelo white fragility shit. Like the original critical race theorists, and most of them today, don't say ridiculous shit like that. Like they basically say there are racially disproportionate outcomes. Let's try to change laws to try to solve that. And then, as I said, it's important to point out that it's not that simple. It's not just this one thing. It's also branched out into other areas. So there are different types of critical race theory, as there is different type of critical theory, as there are different types of so-called postmodernism, and a lot of people have written about it, and a lot of people disagree about it a lot. So there are different approaches to critical race theory. There are the people who want to take the legal or political approaches, like I said, and then there are people who want to focus on the fact that race is a social construct. Even right-winger / libertarian Thomas Sowell says that in his book called Intellectuals and Race. Race is a social construct based on biological characteristics, and it is, because skin color is biological. That's all it is. It's a social category that we decided is meaningful. Someone's skin color is meaningful because we decided it is so. But anyway, so there are all other approaches that critical race theorists take to critical race theory. Some of them talk about how race is a social construct and how we should change the way that we look at the concept of race culturally in our society. And then there are other people who get into this fucking crazy shit that people like James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson are talking about. And it does exist, but it's fucking fringe within critical race theory. And they don't even fucking mention that, probably because they don't even fucking know it. But this fucking crazy shit where they're saying, okay, let's get into intersectionality. Now, in this hypothetical racist interaction, who has more power and what is the most negative aspect of oppression if there's a disabled lesbian black woman, which is the worst part of the oppression in this scenario? That crazy fucking shit does happen, but it's the vast minority of critical race theory, and critical race theory has nothing to do with postmodernism or critical theory. Adorno and Horkheimer saying the Enlightenment is anti-Semitic has nothing to do with people talking about about different types of oppression, or people trying to legally change racial disparities within the critical justice system, or people criticizing the Enlightenment and how religion and science constructed categories that distinguish between homosexual and heterosexual people. These are all very different academic realms of thought, as I said. So it's important to understand that these are very, very different ideas. But anyway, so to get back to the claim, Adorno and Horkheimer's claim that the Enlightenment is a mistake because it's fundamentally anti-Semitic. Now, I thought about this because this reminded me of a conversation that I had, a podcast that I did on this channel with my friend Shane Kennedy and his friend as well. Shane is an Orthodox Christian and his friend is a Protestant Christian. And we were talking about an article that Shane sent me about how basically the Canadian sociologist Marshal McLuhan's opinion that the Protestant Reformation was a mistake, and Marshal McLuhan was a Catholic. So, this fucking crazy wacko type of extremist fundamentalism in his version of Catholicism anyway, Marshal McLuhan's version of it, because he thought that the Protestant Reformation was a mistake because there was a strict doctrine that everyone adhered to, and after the Protestant Reformation, people could read and interpret religion themselves. Oh no, we can't have that. So that ruins the idea of God and faith and shit, apparently, because even though it's a fucking paradox, because according to orthodoxy, at least my friend Shane's version, the advantage to this strict doctrine, at least in the orthodox sense about God and faith, is that there should be an aspect of mystery to them. So more people being able to interpret it should add more mystery if you want to be logical. But you don't have to be, because that's an aspect of reason. So that's why I don't care if people are religious, even if I disagree with them. But anyway, that's my point, is that saying that the Protestant Reformation is fundamentally a mistake is going too far, in the same sense that saying that the Enlightenment itself was a mistake, if you're Adorno and Horkheimer. So they're basically religious and anti-religious theories, both for and against religion, like anti-religious proposals against religion and religious proposals against religion changing, basically. So I just, the point is that ideas can be good, and they can have negative aspects too. Like, this is pretty easy shit to figure out. It shouldn't be difficult. So I think that the Protestant Reformation was a good thing, because before that, the priests would just stand at the front of the church. They would stand facing the front of the church with their back to the audience, reading in Latin, which no one could understand. So people couldn't read Latin or understand it. So priests could just fucking go up there and babble, and they're supposed to believe their interpretations. So this is Martin Luther putting his 99 Theses on the church door, of course, which is a famous moment of the Protestant Reformation. So I think this is a good thing, in a similar way to my opinion that the Enlightenment was a good thing. But I think there are many valid criticisms of it. many more valid criticisms of the Enlightenment than the Protestant Reformation, in my opinion, though. But anyway, so people get extreme about this shit, as I said, right? And what do I have next here? Oh, yeah. So this is Marshal McLuhan, the Canadian sociologist who thought that the Protestant Reformation was a mistake, which is just fucking stupid, in my opinion. But anyway, people, so this is, in terms of the Protestant Reformation, I forgot to mention that original article. It was by Jonathan Pageau, or actually, I think it was actually published on his website. And he is, I thought of that too, because he is associated with Jordan Peterson, who is one of the public intellectuals who has been spreading all this misinformation about postmodernism, critical theory, and critical race theory. And Jonathan Pageau is an Orthodox Christian, and he agrees with Marshal McLuhan. Or actually, I shouldn't say that he agrees with Marshal McLuhan. I don't actually know that. But he seems, when I've seen him talk about this, he seems pretty favorable to Marshal McLuhan's idea that the Protestant Reformation was a mistake. Which, as I said, you're entitled to your opinion, but that's fucking stupid. But anyway, so like I said, Adorno and Horkheimer, they talked about how the Enlightenment is a mythology. And I agree, in the same sense that Catholicism is a mythology, and Marxism is, and any political ideology is. I wouldn't say that postmodernism or critical theory or critical race theory are, though, because they don't have any fundamental principles that anyone agrees on. But anyway, mythologies of the world. That looks like maybe Thor and his hammer, although I think that's maybe a Greek god. I didn't double check that before I went to it. So anyway, the Enlightenment, there's this mythology of reason and rationality and science and figuring out things logically. Praise the mighty rationality and reason. People get that way. This leads to scientism and positivism and thinking like fucking Sam Harris, of course, that, science can solve moral problems. It can provide us with objective moral principles, bro. Totally. So you can get carried away with anything, right? You can get carried away with criticizing science and saying that it's bullshit, or like these fucking anti-vaxxers who won't get a vax because they're stupid and they don't research shit. Or you can get too extreme in the opposite direction and say, bro, somehow science can determine what is right and wrong because, that makes a whole lot of fucking sense. So people get fucking extreme. But anyway, this is another fundamental and important difference, I think, that I'm going to end on here between so-called postmodernists or post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida and Adorno and Horkheimer and Marxists like that in critical theory in the Frankfurt School is the way that they looked at power. That's a crucial difference here. So the way that Foucault defines power very, very specifically, in an extremely detailed way, in his book that I've been doing a series on called History of Sexuality. So check out that series if you want to know more. I've done a few videos, like half-hour-long videos that go into detail about his definition of power. So, contrary to what public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson in particular, and actually also James Lyndsay lately are saying, is that Foucault thinks everything is about power, and that power is inherently bad, and that we need to bring down all these structures of Western society, bro. So, because there's too much power. But that's totally fucking bullshit. Now, Foucault says explicitly in the History of Sexuality, I am not saying that there is a binary between the powerful and the people who do not have power. I am not saying that there are good and bad things here. I am not saying that power is inherently bad. I use an example in one of my videos that I made about this in terms of language, and Foucault himself has used similar examples. So the N-word, for example, it was used by white people for a long time as a racist way to refer to black people. And then rappers, because they're fucking awesome, they reappropriated the word and they took the negative power away from the N-word. In a sense, it's still racist if white people say it, which is why I'm not going to say it in this video, even though I have said it before. It was a way for white people to use their power to oppress black people, and it still can be if white people are choosing to be racist. But the point is that black rappers took the power back from this word by making the N-word into an expression of brotherly love or just an expression for black people, and they started using it in rap songs. So they reappropriated the word to make it a positive rather than a negative. This is a way that power is good. Remember I said that Foucault said that government is the only fatal form of power? Well, he was definitely not a Marxist in that he thought that government authoritarianism is the worst form of power because it oppresses everyone. And it's a way for the powerful to oppress other people without power. If the people without power got more government, if the government became less powerful and the people had more power, then Foucault would see that as a good thing. But like I said, power is a tool. It depends on how you use it. You can use power for good or bad. You can use your power to oppress others, or you can use your power to break your bonds of oppression, basically, right? So that's it. It's a pretty fucking simple distinction. Foucault has a nuanced approach to power, and the big difference, like I said, between people like Foucault and Derrida and people like Adorno and Horkheimer and the self-proclaimed Marxists in critical theory in the Frankfurt School is that they did see power as inherently bad, and that the Enlightenment was inherently bad, because the people who were the proponents of the Enlightenment did that as a way to promote reason in the form of anti-Semitism. So power is anti-Semitism, and the Enlightenment is bad because it was a way that the powerful spread anti-Semitism as widely as possible, which led to the Nazis, because the Nazis are the champions of reason, power, and the Enlightenment. That's a crucial difference. Okay, so just to sum up briefly here, the main point is that in Adorno and Horkheimer, wow, I've been talking for a long time, but this is fucking detailed. Adorno and Horkheimer talk about how the Enlightenment was fundamentally a mistake because it was anti-Semitic to its core, and the Nazis were the champions of reason, rationality, science, logic, and Enlightenment principles. So this is totally different from critical race theory, which for the majority of it is people examining the ways that we can change laws and lobby politically to change laws to try to solve racial disparities between people in the American criminal justice system. That's mostly what critical race theory is. And most of what so-called postmodernism is people like Foucault and Derrida making valid criticisms of the Enlightenment without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like, for example, as I said, institutions of science and religion deciding that it's sinful and a medical flaw for you to be gay, even though for most of history before then, for the most part, other than some exceptions, of course, people didn't fucking give a shit. So, critical theory, critical race theory, and postmodernism are three very separate things. Public intellectuals have good intentions. They're doing some useful shit and doing some good shit, but they're also spreading a whole bunch of fucking bullshit about postmodernism, critical theory, and critical race theory. So, the dialectic of enlightenment is what critical theory is. As I said, that's what this video is mainly supposed to be about. The Enlightenment is a mythology. I agree with that. I don't agree that it's a mistake or anti-Semitic. All right, I think I've said enough now and rambled on long enough. So hopefully you like this video. I hope you understand the distinctions between these, and that public intellectuals can have good intentions, but they don't know what the fuck they're talking about most of the time with this shit. So yeah, anyway, click that like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, share it everywhere, tell your friends about it, or criticize my theories and tell me I'm an idiot if you're like ideologically attached to Jordan Peterson or James Lyndsay or people like that. And yeah, check out my Patreon if you want to give me money, which is awesome. I greatly appreciate that. It's at Mindgasms. The link is in the description for the video, as it always is. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. And groove is in the heart. And public intellectuals have good intentions and do good things, but a lot of them don't know what the fuck they're talking about a lot of the time. And check out my next videos. I don't think I mentioned it yet, but I think on Saturday morning, I'm going to be doing a podcast with Jared from Wisecrack, Jared Bauer from Wisecrack, the awesome philosophy YouTube channel where they talk about movies, TV shows, philosophy, Rick and Morty, South Park, all kinds of awesome shit. So that's going to be fun. We're going to talk about this very subject: critical theory, critical race theory, postmodernism, and public intellectuals like James Lyndsay and Jordan Peterson, and how accurate they're being and whether they're doing something good or bad, basically, which is pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome to be able to talk to someone like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we're not going to have a fucking heated debate or a fight. We're going to have a chill conversation. So look forward to that. And also on Sunday, we're going to do a follow-up. Me, Dusty, and Chris, Tubin and the Woke Centrists, we're going to do our follow-up conversation about COVID, and we're also going to talk about Afghanistan. We're going to talk about Rhonda Patrick, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, going on Joe Rogan's podcast, and basically in detail debunking the fuck out of Brett Weinstein's claims about vaccine dangers and ivermectin utility. And we're also going to talk about warmongers getting all butthurt over Biden pulling out of Afghanistan. I'm not really a big fan of him at all, but I think that's probably the best thing that he'll do, which is obviously an awesome thing, even though, like I said, I'm not a fan of his. But all right, so yeah, that's it. Keep learning and, examining your own biases, even though I, as all people, are biased. Keep trying to learn and understand that ideas are not evil. How you use them, they're like tools. How you use them is what matters. You can learn about these things like critical theory and critical race theory and postmodernism, and that, no, they're not evil and poison ideas. Sorry, intellectual dark web Jordan Peterson and James Lyndsay. You're wrong. I like you, but you're wrong. All right. So thanks again, everyone. I've talked long enough, and adios until next time.